Hey guys, it's Emily. This is going to be my second video on Nintendo Switch. This one is going to be about the different types of controllers you can have on a Nintendo Switch, being Joy-Cons, which you can put into the little Joy-Con grip that's included with your Nintendo Switch when you buy it, or as I got myself last year, a Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, which is, in my opinion, a much superior option, especially if it's just you gaming and you like to use either tabletop mode or pop your Nintendo Switch in the dock and then play by yourself. This is definitely much more comfier for longer gaming sessions. Whereas these little Joy-Cons, they're really good for when you have people around, because you can give these two Joy-Cons off to someone else and you've still got your own Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. Or if you have 3 people and you've got games that support single Joy-Cons, you've already got 2 Joy-Cons, one for each of your friends, plus your own Pro Controller. Of course you're not going to give that to someone else. It's always your own. Okay, a brand new shiny Nintendo Switch. You've opened it up and you've discovered that the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons are actually much smaller than you first expected, which seems a little bit weird, but these controllers are absolutely tiny and they do look like they're made for ants. But you know that Nintendo's been making a Pro Controller which is around £60, depending on where you get it from. So the question is it worth buying one of these or sticking with the original Joy-Cons that come on your Nintendo Switch and just adding them into your Nintendo Switch Joy-Con grip? Well, let's take a look at all the different ways that you can play your Switch games and which ways are best. There are 3 basic methods aside from using them in handheld mode, which is just like this, so Nintendo Switch, and then both of your Joy-Cons just attached at the side of the tablet. So the first one is you can use a pair of Joy-Cons. So both Joy-Cons like this. This is a pair, so one left, one right. Or you can use one in each hand like this. So you've got all your buttons, SL, SR, A, B, X and Y, and then obviously your thumb controller. And obviously it's slightly different on the other controller. You can put them both together to make one controller, which is using the Nintendo Switch grip. This is supposed to be a little bit more like using a real controller, a bit more like a Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller, or more like the Pro Controller here, which I have. It's not exactly the same. As you can see, it's quite square and it's not the comfiest. It's kind of not very grippy on the back. It's more shiny plastic material, kind of feels like a bit like a cheap plastic material, so it's not very good for long periods of time. Your hands are in a slightly better position than if you're just holding the one Joy-Con, but it's still not optimal. Definitely much better with the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. I forgot to mention earlier that you can use the Nintendo Switch controllers as a pair, just one in each hand, which is slightly more comfortable than putting them in the grip which is provided. Definitely more comfortable. I mean, if you ever used the Nintendo Wii, you'd know that having 2 Wii remotes, one in each hand, this feels rather similar because you have got 2 Joy-Cons, one in each hand. And obviously it's more comfortable, easier to use, as you don't have a cable running between these two, as they are wireless. So there's no cable anymore, so you can do whatever you want with your hands, for example. But it can be rather, like, I do realise it can be annoying having one in each hand or both hands all the time while you're gaming. But if you do have larger hands, you can put your 2 Nintendo Switch controllers inside the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con grip, which comes with the original Nintendo Switch, not the Lite, obviously, because the Joy-Cons don't attach. but this does make it slightly easier for people with larger hands. Like, my hands aren't the largest, they're rather small really, so this doesn't make much difference for me. It's just as comfortable as holding 2 Joy-Cons or one. The other option, straight out the box, is to put these into the Nintendo Switch grip, which personally I isn't the best way. It's supposed to be closer to the traditional controller, which is more accurate, but it's basically getting the worst aspects of the Joy-Cons, but none of the benefits of any of the Joy-Cons, which is a bit weird and it doesn't really make sense. The grips, they're very, very tiny. They're not grippy at all. Like, the back, as I said earlier, is kind of like a cheap plastic. It's shiny, it doesn't allow you to actually grip. Like, if you're going to be gaming for a long period of time and you get sweaty hands, like, this is not the way forward you want to be going with. Like, it's really shiny, not grippy at all. There's no grip, it's just pure plastic, the grip that comes with it, compared to the Nintendo Switch controller, which I don't know if you can see, but it's got a little different pattern for where your hands go here, so it's got more grip to it, and then the base and the top are a different type of plastic, more like the controller grip here. So definitely have more grip holding onto this, and you'll be able to game easier and for longer periods of time. We're definitely much better. I found myself in some games where, for instance, let's say you have to hit a B to jump and a Y to attack, that I'll accidentally hit the X and the Y together, which is kind of a big problem for most gamers, because you don't want to be hitting 2 buttons at the same time when you only want to be hitting 1. This is mainly because the Joy-Con is small and there's barely any space between any of the buttons, that you end up hitting 2 in one go, which isn't ideal. Now, the really interesting thing about this is not a lot of people notice that the left and the right Joy-Con don't actually have the same spacing. So, for instance, the left or the right, depending on which way around you use it, are actually designed differently. Now, this is really surprising to me, because I've only just figured this out by actually looking at the Joy-Con and reading a few reviews, but I don't know if you guys have noticed it, but the left and the right Joy-Cons don't actually have the same spacing. So the left and the right Joy-Cons, I don't know if you've seen them up close, there isn't actually the same spacing on all the buttons and the placement on the right and the left. The Joy-Cons on the Nintendo Switch are really versatile, but how do all the options of using a Joy-Con, from using one Joy-Con to 2 Joy-Cons, using a Joy-Con grip, a Joy-Con steering wheel, actually stack up against using an actual traditional controller like the Pro Controller? Well, honestly, they don't. This Pro Controller is a much better option, personally. The Nintendo Switch Pro Controller is evolutional of what Nintendo have been trying to do since the Wii U Pro Controller. So if any of you bought the Wii U, you know that they released a Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, which is basically just an Xbox 360 controller, but they decided to try something slightly different with it. And the Switch buttons and the Switch sticks were obviously added onto that controller. But honestly, it didn't really feel all that great. But with the new Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, you'll see that they're using the exactly same setup overall, but it's just designed slightly differently, so it feels much better in your hands. It feels a lot better now, to be honest. Now, there is an exception to this, and that's the fact that when it comes to really intensive gaming, I do prefer the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller for sure. But if I'm doing anything that's a much slower paced game, or if it's turn-based, or if it's a really easy game that I don't have to be super focused on, I actually end up just using the Joy-Cons attached to the Nintendo Switch, or using the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con grip, as that's just a much easier lay back and relax type feeling of controller when you're just laying back and relaxing and using them. Whereas using the Pro Controller like this, I feel like it's more dedicated to gaming modes that are more fun, more fast paced, shooter game type games. It's just the way it feels in your hands is just, there's different times that you'd use the Joy-Cons compared to a Pro Controller. Getting back to my original question, should you rush out and buy a Pro Controller right away? Not really. They're pretty cool. They're worth having, especially if you want to upgrade your Joy-Cons at some point. But it's not the kind of thing that you need. It's not the type of thing that you need. It's not kind of thing that's a necessity. It's a luxury, in all honesty. 60 quid for one controller for one person compared to 70 for 2 Joy-Cons. So that's essentially 2 more people you could have playing on your Switch. Whereas if you buy a Pro Controller, that's 1 player versus 2, and it's a £10 difference between the 2, but it's up to you. The Joy-Cons are comfortable and they do get the job done, and they come in a wide range of pretty colours, from blue, purple, yellow, green, pink, or to your traditional grey controllers, which comes on the base Nintendo Switch, along with the neon blue and red controllers, which come on one of the base Switches as well. Or you can get a selection of different Pro Controllers. I have seen a Smash Pro Controller, which is pretty much the same as the original Pro Controller that I have here, with a few different Smash designs. It's nothing special. You can get a Splatoon version, and I do believe there's another version of the Pro Controller. I just don't know what it is. If I find it, I will put the link to it down. Joy-Cons are special because you can detach them. They can act as 2 separate controllers in a multiplayer game for games like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate or Mario Kart 8, ARMS. This makes them fantastic options for when you're hosting different games nights, or if you just want to have a lot of family and friends playing together. Whereas if you prefer playing alone and you want to have a more comfortable controller for when you're playing games like Super Smash Ultimate or Splatoon, you can use the Pro Controller as it's more comfortable in your hands, but it also feels way more familiar and similar to other gaming controllers out there from the big brands like Xbox, PlayStation. It just depends what you feel suits best for you. There is not just one that fits all, which is why they've brought out the Pro Controller, Joy-Cons, different colours of Joy-Cons, different styles of Pro Controllers. My final thoughts on the Pro Controller and the Joy-Cons is that it's worth having the Pro Controller and the Joy-Cons, as you can use your Pro Controller because that's more comfortable to you and you're going to be using it a heck of a lot more than your guests, as your guests are only going to be there for a couple of hours, say, so they can use the Joy-Cons. But after taking it all into consideration, the Pro Controller is mainly there for single use, like own personal use only. This is why you have a more comfortable Pro Controller for normal usage, and the 2 Joy-Cons that come with it for anyone that's just tagging along with your game or hanging out with you for that day. The Joy-Cons aren't really made for a full 4 or 5 hour gaming session.
Okay guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe and leave a comment. Thanks, bye.